A 7-page judgment that poked holes in the President and NPA's case.
Mr. NPA had told Mr. Downer that the timing of the service of the indictment had been his decision alone. In a supplementary affidavit, he explained that he had been untruthful in that regard in order not to bring Mr. Downer under the impression that he had been influenced by the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development. That explanation itself impacts negatively on Mr. NPA's credibility and on the soundness of his decision to discontinue the prosecution.
The judge also found Mkhothadi evoked the wrong law to drop the charges and damage the NPA's credibility. But the court steered clear of instructing the NPA how to proceed on this matter.
We'll consider the judgment, interrogate it extensively before commenting on it. However, I can assure the South Africans that the National Director and his team, after considering the judgment, will do what is correct in the eyes of the law.
The DA, who has been battling this matter since the dropping of the charges in 2009, has welcomed the ruling.
We are giving Shaun Abrahams to say, don't tether yourself to this issue. Separate yourself and prove that you are not Shaun the sheep, that in fact you want to protect your oath of office, which is compelled and is derived from the very essence of the rule of law in this country.
Meanwhile, the ANC is facing calls from political parties to recall President Zuma.
We've got full confidence in our judiciary as the African National Congress and the options it offers to the aggrieved parties. And in this regard, the parties, they've got options. And I think until those options are ventilated by parties involved, the African National Congress is not in the position to make a comprehensive statement.
So the best approach here is for the ANC, which paraded JZ, fully knowing that he was a suspect, is for them to recall President Zuma. He should be resigning under normal democracy.
Well, it was to be expected, given the fact that the President's legal advisors, as well as the NPA, had conceded the point before the judgment was given.
Jacob Zuma must face the full might of the law. He has always said he's innocent. So if he's innocent, he must not be scared of the court. He must go and face the full might of the court.
The President, who's on a state visit in Zambia, is yet to respond to the ruling. Hasina Gori, SABC News.
Well, for more on this, SABC's political reporter Alvin Sampier joins me in studio. Alvin, thanks for joining us. All right, so let's unpack this a bit. What does this all mean? I mean, the CSA rejecting with costs President's appeal in this long-running battle to avoid prosecution, and they were unanimous in their finding.
Yeah, so essentially what this means, in this intro that we heard earlier on as well, is that the ball is now essentially in Shaun Abrahams' court. He now needs to decide how to go forward with this matter. But what we should also take into consideration is that President Jacob Zuma's counsel have also argued that President Zuma wants to make a representation, but the court stayed clear of delving into that matter. So what this court ruling means is that the High Court ruling that the decision taken by Mkhothadi back in 2009 was irrational and should be set aside, that now stands. Also the decision that President Jacob Zuma must face the charges in the indictment now also stands, because now the NPA as well as President Jacob Zuma's application has now been set aside. But this court judgment also goes a bit further, looking into some of the technical arguments in terms of Mkhothadi's conduct as well.
Justice Leach also then pointing out in terms or a number of ways in which NPA's decision was irrational, including the fact that the prosecution team had been excluded from that decision. But I mean, it doesn't come as a surprise.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, Mr. Downer, who was leading the investigation on behalf of the prosecution team, they were not involved in the final decision that was taken in March of 2009. The court found that that decision was irrational. The decision of not involving the prosecution team that has spent so much time and effort and resources into this case, not being part of making the final decision. And the court actually says that it's understandable why the prosecution team was aggrieved by this decision that has been taken by Mkhothadi, who had still at the time, even during the press briefing, had said that there are the merits against President Jacob Zuma, or who was then just the deputy president of the ANC, the president president of the ANC rather, was strong. So you have that argument. And then on the other hand as well, when Downer asked Mkhothedi Mshe if this was his decision, Mkhothedi Mshe said, this is my decision only. And subsequently, it has now turned out that actually Mkhothedi Mshe lied to Downer. So what the court is saying that while you made the argument that you're trying to protect the integrity of the NPA, what you've actually done is that you've damaged the integrity of the NPA by lying to a senior prosecutor.
And calls for the charges to be reinstated against the president. How likely is that the charges will be reinstated?
This is another difficult one because, as I've indicated, that what President Jacob Zuma's counsel wants is that they want some sort of representation and they want the matter to start all over again. The arguments during the court proceedings was from the NPA side was saying that they need a direct order from the court stating this is how the NPA should go forward dealing with this matter. The court has stayed clear of that, and it now means that the NPA will now have to take the final decision on how do they go forward with this matter. But what we should take into consideration is that in 2009, it was back in 2007 when the indictment was served on President Jacob Zuma in December of 2007. What has happened since 2007, December, until 2017, what month are we now in? Is it October? In the month of October 2017, 10 years. Yeah. What has happened in the space of 10 years? Does it mean that the charges that are in the indictment still stand? I was saying earlier on to Elvis as well that one of the arguments that Justice Kachalia made during the Supreme Court of Appeals hearing was that the possibility is that evidence could disappear. And there is a possibility that evidence could disappear, or there could be additional evidence. And the political analyst that we were with earlier on, Terkutsia, also argued that, you know, when you look at the spy tapes matter, if you look into the corruption charges or allegations against President Jacob Zuma right now relating to the Gupta family, would that then be part of a grand charge against President Jacob Zuma, the case against President Jacob Zuma?
Well, you raise an interesting point because the court also raised the concern about how President Zuma got hold of the spy tapes.
Yes, and this is quite interesting, though. If you read the judgment, this is now the full judgment. It says here there's no indication how the recordings came to be in the possession of President Zuma's legal team, and it would almost seem that the NPA cowered into submission by the threat to use these recordings, the legality of the possession of which is doubtful. So even the argument around how President Jacob Zuma's legal team got these spy tapes, was it legal? Because we have laws that guide us in terms of when it comes to intercepting calls and so forth. But the court also raised concerns, saying that it was concerning that government institutions were spying upon each other. So that's something quite interesting. Yeah. And does this then mean if argument is made that President Jacob Zuma's legal team got possession of the tapes illegally, does this then mean that another case, an additional case, could be brought against President Jacob Zuma's team? But a book that's written by Adrian Basson, a journalist, I think it's called Zuma Exposed. That book speaks about how the recordings were made. The recordings were made back in the early 2000s when the Scorpions were investigating Jackie Silibi. And remember that during that time when Jackie Silibi was the police commissioner, and that was that whole tussle between the Scorpions as well as the police. And then there were these recordings against McCarthy. They were investigating him in a drug scandal, and that's how they got a hold of these recordings. And these recordings were evoked actually and in the labor court matter by Nomngobo Jiba.
Oh, Alvin, there's so many. We could talk for hours about this. But before we wrap up, just give us a sense of what this means on a political level and for the brand ANC.
Well, on a political level, this is something quite interesting, and there's no doubt that it will tarnish brand ANC and ANC. And I see earlier on Kolim Gambi from from ENCA tried to speak to Gwede Mantashe about it, and it was quite interesting how Gwede Mantashe did not want to respond to this specific question. question about this court ruling that has now been set, that has now been handed down. And Gwede Mantashe, now speaking at the Veterans Conference, mentions that, and he was speaking in his class, mentioning that abantu abaningi bathetha ngezityala ezininzi ezika president, speaking about all these corruption charges or all these charges that the president has been facing, and calling on the president to step down. We need to have a sound approach in how we deal with this matter. So not only does it affect brand ANC from an electorate's point of view, but also internally what happens with the ANC. And Terkutsia was making the argument earlier on that even President Jacob Zuma's convincing power to be able to persuade ANC voters who would be heading to the elective conference is now being dented a bit, because we know that President Jacob Zuma has endorsed formally, or endorsed Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma to succeed him. Although if you speak to Bantu Olumisa, he'll make the argument that actually it's a decoy. President Zuma's person is William Kiza.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
it's a decoy?
that's the argument that Bantu Olumisa makes.
And that's a whole other topic of discussion.
Definitely,
Aldrin, thank you very much for that. Our Aldrin St. Pierre going through that spy tapes judgment for us. Now on to other news.